You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Happy New Year to everybody. We hope that everybody's New Year was a wonderful, good one. 2020 is here as we approach completion of year number 3 of the Hazard Ground Podcast. And we are on our way to our 150th episode coming up here in a few weeks. Again, we can't tell you how much we certainly appreciate you guys being part of the Hazard Ground community and how much you guys have meant to us over the past 3 years. And look, this thing doesn't exist without you guys really wanting it to exist. The feedback that we get is off the charts, and we certainly love hearing from you guys. And people have made donations to us, which we certainly appreciate. I mean, look, we didn't do this for money. We didn't do this to try and make any money. We did this to tell some great stories. But the response, again, that you guys have given us and how much you support this podcast means the world to us, and it certainly does to all of our guests who have been part of it, all of their charities and organizations that you guys have helped support over the last 3 years. This is one big family, and we're certainly happy to have you guys part of it. Speaking of donations and charity, don't forget about our Amazon promotion. Go to our website, hazardground.com, click on that Amazon banner on the homepage, or on any page for that matter, and do all your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage, and we'll donate it back to all of the charities and organizations that we've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Don't forget to follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Really need to up those social media followings, guys, because it helps us get the word out to more and more people. We want to grow this community as big as possible. So the more that you guys can share the stuff you see on the Hazard Ground, on Twitter, on Facebook, and Instagram, that's going to help us grow and get a bigger audience and better guests as we continue to move forward. Lastly, there is a lot of news going on in the world about the military and where we are and everything that we're embroiled in to this point. Once again, we just want to take a quick moment to thank everybody who's still serving in uniform and those who are in harm's way throughout the world. Obviously, the job that we all do is dangerous, and the life of service that we chose to lead puts us in very dangerous situations. But to that end, it is a choice and it is a life that we chose to lead. So we all accept that responsibility and we certainly embrace it. And to that end, we want to tell you another amazing story this week because it is one that sort of is in the same vein of what we see going on around the world. Here's this week's episode. Joining us this week, we are extremely honored to have another Medal of Honor recipient. He is a Marine Corps retired Major General who spent nearly 34 years in the Corps, and he received his Medal of Honor for his efforts during the Battle of Dai Do, one of the more decisive battles in the entire Vietnam War. He was wounded 3 times during the battle and managed to hold on to an important city and a strategic city in Vietnam. He is retired Major General James Livingston joining us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Sir, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. I'm really pleased to be here.
All right, sir. Well, obviously a historic career. 34 years is nothing to shake a stick at, and there's not many people who get to call themselves Medal of Honor recipients, so certainly well-earned, well-deserved. Congratulations. But we want to start back at the beginning and how and why you got into the Marine Corps.
Well, I tell you what, I joined the Marine Corps in 1961 after getting my draft notice at Auburn University and decided to go in the Marine Corps. So I had to go to 2 boot camps in one summer, which is the Officers Boot Camp up at Quantico, Virginia. Finished about 13-week boot camp, came back to Auburn University, finished my final year, graduated in June 62, and went to the next level school for officers up at Quantico, Virginia, called the Basic School.
Did you sign up to be an officer? Or, I mean, how did that come about?
No, when I got my draft notice, I decided I wanted to be an officer, and I ran across a Marine major down at the Student Union at Auburn University. He was about 6'4", lean and mean looking. And I said, I want to be like him and wear that uniform. That's
simple. Okay. So were you allowed to finish your college education first?
Yeah, I was in a particular program for the Marine Corps called Platoon Leader Class. It still exists in the Marine Corps. It's a great program. If you don't want to go through a ROTC program or go to the academy, what you do is you normally go 2 summers to Quantico. Or if you graduate, you can go 1 summer to Officer Candidate School, and they put you through a very rigorous screening process. And if you make the cut, PLC-wise, when you graduate from your university, your commission, in conjunction with your graduation, then you're off to the next level of schooling as a second lieutenant of the Marines.
One more question as far as getting in. How come you didn't get a student deferment for the draft?
Well, I tell you what, a lot of my classmates in that time frame, you probably well aware, were getting deferments. All you had to do is say that you were going to stay in college and take the minimum amount of hours. So a lot of these guys became professional students and stayed in college till after the Vietnam War was over, basically. And that's where we get a lot of our PhDs now, who are college professors and lawyers and those kind of people. Not discrediting them. That's where a lot of them come from, though. Those people who decided to stay in college and not fulfill their military obligations at the time.
Well, how come you chose to go the draft route?
Well, I tell you what, I was always patriotic. I came from a little small farming town. My uncle was in the 82nd Airborne. He got 2 jumps during World War II. I always felt that sense of patriotism, sense of belonging to the country. Most of all, I felt that sense of responsibility as an American citizen to serve my country, regardless of what was going on, what the conflict was about. It was my responsibility as an American citizen because people had provided me that opportunity because of their service and sacrifice in previous wars.
Were you worried about going to combat at that time?
This was in 61. Vietnam was really just sort of
a conflict.
So being heard of.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that went on probably in 62 was the troops went to the Dominican Republic. And Cuba was going on, and that was part of the thought process then. Not very much about Vietnam. It was primarily focused on Cuba and the Caribbean area.
Right, on Cuban Missile Crisis and everything else. Okay, so I'm just kind of curious, and I don't know why, because we don't ask many people this question, but out of curiosity, where were you when Kennedy was shot?
When Kennedy was shot, I was on a hill. Believe it or not, I was on a hill in a foxhole at Camp Pendleton, California.
Just doing training?
Yeah, we were training in Camp Pendleton, California when he was shot, and I got the word while we were on that hill in a dug-in position, going through our training process. So much we talk about where people are on 9/11 of your generation. That was, Kennedy, that was the 9/11 of my generation. Yeah, sure. And that's where I was. And, I very much recall that. And the concern about what happened, because ironically, the guy shot him had been a former Marine. And that was really caused the Marine Corps a lot of concern, how the Marine Corps is going to be looked at because of this individual who shot him, who incidentally was trained at Parris Island in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
All right, let's fast forward a little bit. When do you first hear the word Vietnam as far as it concerns the Marines and what you might be doing with it?
My first really introduction to Vietnam, there used to be a series called Platoon, a platoon leader, based on a series that was developed with a Marine lieutenant, was the center core of it. He was assigned to Camp Pendleton, California, and he was assigned to the 5th Marines, and he used to go up to Laguna Beach and all those kind of places. So every Marine in the Marine Corps, there was an officer was trying to play up in his tracks to be assigned 5th Marines and go to Laguna Beach and look for girls and look for fun, okay?
Not a bad deal, I guess, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
When do you actually start understanding the fact that you guys may be going over there?
Well, when we were getting ready to transplace, it became apparent with more advisors going in, with more helicopters going in, and we were on the way to Okinawa as a replacement battalion, that maybe something would break out while we're in that area. And we were not in that area very long until something did happen down in Vietnam. It started to heat up a little bit with more activity with the Viet Cong. So they put us offshore in Navy ships about 30 or 40 miles from Da Nang, and we circled in the ocean probably a couple of months out there waiting a call to go ashore. We sent some guys, including myself, ashore as observers to watch the people, the advisors to the Vietnamese. We would get to know them, get to know the techniques, look at what they see, look at the threat they see, and spend some time with them. And that was my introduction in 63 and 4. And I was part of the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines. And We never did go in as a battalion. However, we came back to Okinawa and we moved back, replaced ourselves and moved back to the States. And very shortly after we got back to the States, battalions started to go in, and that was some of the initial operations against primarily the Viet Cong. And the major operation involving the Marines was an operation called Starlight. And that was really the first big contact with the U.S. Marines in Vietnam with 3 battalions. And one happened to be my old battalion from Okinawa, the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, and a couple of more battalions.
So when do you actually land in Vietnam?
I actually went back to Vietnam in 67 and 68. I came back to the States, went to a school, and then went back in 67 and 68. And as soon as I got there, I landed in Da Nang in 67. I think it was September, and I was assigned a rifle company. And the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, called the Magnificent Bastards, Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. Mm-hmm. And they were up on the DMZ, and they'd just been hammered a couple of times. And they needed replacements, and almost totally all the company planners were replaced, and probably 30 or 40% of the troops. So they had been in a serious contact up in that area for a couple of weeks.
All right. I want to back up one quick second, because I know you said you went back to the States and then you came there. In that time, while you were, on the ship near Vietnam in Southeast Asia, were you like itching to get on land and get in the fight? I mean, it was starting to pick up a little bit at that point in time in 65 time frame.
Yeah, we're the most trained battalion in the Marine Corps at the time. We've been probably about 9 months or so in Okinawa. We trained in Japan, Philippines, all over. So there was no more ready battalion in the Marine Corps at that time than the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines. And obviously, being Marines, we were ready to get in the fight. And everyone wanted to go ashore, but it just never happened.
Okay, and so then you go back to school. Are you sitting here wondering, like, God, what the hell am I doing here? Everything's going on over there, and I'm sitting here back in the States taking school, or...
Yeah, well, you go back and, you want to get in the fight if you're a Marine officer, and that's that point in your career. You really are ready to go, and you trained up for it, and it didn't happen until 67 for me when I went back.
All right. When you land in 67, as you mentioned, you're up near the DMZ. What's kind of just like everyday life like when you get there? What's the operational tempo like?
Well, it was, I'll tell you, we went in the bush and stayed there basically for 9 months, except for a really short period down in the Philippines. And we were out there, chasing VCs, chasing NBA, and involved in that the whole period. And we were in some pretty good contact, at various times during the whole 9-month period. Initially, it was the Viet Cong around Quang Tri province, and we moved up around the Qua Viet, between the Qua Viet and Ben Hai. And that's when we really started to hit some major contact with hardcore North Vietnamese troops.
All right. Before we get to, April, late April in 1968, how many guys had you lost prior to that? And kind of what was that doing for morale? I mean, what was your thought process? Were you scared? I mean, stuff like that.
No, I'll tell you what, I think my company, if I recall, and this is, so many years ago, we had lost 2 or 3 in that company, and the battalion probably had lost 10 or 12 during that period. So, we had been in contact, but nothing major like we were fixing to encounter as soon as we landed up around the DMZ.
Okay. Battle of Do Dai. It's a 3-day battle that begins on April 30th and goes through 2nd/3rd of May. Lead me up to April 29th. Are you sensing things are picking up? Are you sensing that, there is a heightened sense that something is going to happen, or what's kind of the events going up to that?
Well, we're beginning to get all kind of intel traffic, and we were up in a place initially called Ni Ha, and they moved my company from Ni Ha down to the bridge right next to the Dong Ha combat base. The Dong Ha combat base was on the Qua Viet, and what it was is a resupply base for all the major activities across the DMZ.
Okay.
The so-called McNamara line. And also they had the 3rd Marine Division headquarters. And one of the most critical points there was a bridge that led from North Vietnam down to Ben Hai, down across the Qua Viet, going on south to Queen Tree. And that was a critical bridge they initially assigned me to protect because there was starting to be some major contact between the South Vietnamese and other Marine units against the North Vietnamese coming across the river. Come across the Ben Hai River. So they put me there. They were concerned about that bridge. If they destroyed that bridge, that would really crimp our resupply efforts to some degree. And so that was where we was located. And I was viewing some activities between the North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese up Route 1 towards Gia Linh. And finally, it happened. My elements of my battalion stumbled into what ultimately was the Battle of Dai Do.
Okay. And I'm looking at a map as you're talking through this. That's the only bridge really that crosses the river there, correct?
It was a critical bridge, and if you recall the history, you may not, but that bridge was destroyed in '73 by a Marine. His name was John Ripley.
Wow. The morning of April 30th, 1968, is it a normal day at this point? Are you waking up, and how does this whole thing get underway?
Well, no, it was beginning to crank up. I think Hotel Company had made some contact. Golf Company had made some limited contact. Fox Company had made some limited contact. So we were not sure what was transpiring, but what triggered this is, I guess, a young PFC North Vietnamese took a shot at one of those Navy craft that brought supplies up the Qua Viet River from the ocean. Mm-hmm. And they would bring in supply loads, and they'd unload them at Dong Hai, the supply base, and distribute it to all the various units around the around the DMZ. And they took that shot, and this thing began to develop. And our battalion commander, Bill Williams, was ordered to go down and figure out what was going on by Colonel Hull, the regimental commander, who was part of the 3rd Marines located at the mouth of the Qua Viet. He was the regimental commander in charge. And the Hotel Company took a hit, and then this thing began to we began to wonder what the devil was going on. The South Vietnamese were taking a hit up around Gia Linh, and there was a lot of things beginning to develop, and a lot of sensing there was a major effort underway to do something. And this is sort of when I became aware of my potential getting involved with this battle the next day.
So when do you first get asked to move forward into contact?
We got asked let's see, I think it was the morning, probably mid-afternoon, the 1st of May. I was under the operational control of the 3rd Marine Division, and our battalion went through the regimental commander and asked for us to be reattached to the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, because the Battle of Dai Do was sort of underway at that point. The companies were not making that much progress. It looked like Golf Company had been bogged down in the corner. Also, a company from Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, had attempted to join up with a Golf Company in Dai Do and just got totally destroyed. They went from the Qua Viet River towards Dai Do, and they took a hit, and it just destroyed the company, killed the company commander, and they'd all dropped back. So there was no progress made against Dai Do, except Golf Company was trapped in the edge of Dai Do.
So when you say they're trapped, I mean, what are we talking about numbers-wise here? Do you know at this point?
Well, probably my guess is they'd been in a fight. Probably if they had 100, I'd be surprised. But I hadn't been into the fight that much, so I had about 180 troops, including attachment, in Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines.
How many enemy were you facing? Do you know, or are you just guessing by the gunfire at this point how much you're in contact?
I'll tell you what, it was totally, we didn't know. No one knew the size of the force. We just know there were a hell of a lot of bad guys there, and Golf Company was not making any progress. They basically wiped out Alpha Company 1-3. The South Vietnamese across what they call Jones's Creek, adjacent to Dai Do, was not making any progress. There was an outfit called Task Force Robbie up around Route 1, was in a big fight. So it was developing all across the front of that area, and anyone with any military experience knew there was something major underway.
When you start to get a grasp of how big this thing is, Do you feel like the odds are against you at this point?
Marines don't ever feel like the odds are against them. They're
Oh,
ready
that's true.
to kick ass. It was so many unknowns with the developing front. No one had a sense of the size of the force. They just knew there were a lot of bad guys there and didn't know the disposition, didn't really understand what their mission was with that size of force. And it became very apparent to us, all of us later, that mission was to go across that river and take the combat base at Dong Ha, destroy our ability to resupply all the forces and knock off the 3rd Marine Division headquarters. But this was developing to be probably one of the most strategic battles of the war.
What?
Of all the battles we fought in Vietnam, if we had failed, my feeling is, and a lot of people's feeling is, the war had been over.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, even compared to Tet and everything else and everything going on in Saigon?
Yeah, even compared to Tet.
Wow.
Because if you knocked off the 3rd Marine Division, a Marine Division headquarters, the only major resupply base in the northern part of South Vietnam, and all that had been captured, and they had taken that bridge across the Qua Viet River, it would have been a strategic, unbelievable defeat for the United States.
Okay, sir. So the battle is going on here for about 24 plus hours at this point. You're in charge of Echo Company. When do you really have to start making, decisive decisions, and when do you come into contact?
Well, we were ordered to join the battalion headquarters. And when I got there, I went across the creek called Jones's Creek, and we joined the battalion headquarters. And the elements of Alpha 1-3 were falling back. So when I got there, my first effort was to get my company in position, get them dug in. And that's one thing I always do. When there's artillery around or bad guys around, Echo Company or any outfit I got, we dig and make sure we got foxholes. First order of business. But they began to fall back. And I was trying to help reorganize because I'd lost all our officers. And it was really a sad day. And they'd left a number of Marines that were killed out on the battlefield, which was really a rice paddy. And you could see them. So I helped them get off the battlefield, get them reorganized. And to the extent you could, they were just in a traumatic shape, as you might well conclude. And that was my job, to help them and then get ready for whatever orders we may be what may be necessary for us to execute.
To that end, when do you get your first set of orders to execute?
Well, I got my first set of orders to execute at 3:00 on the morning of the 2nd of May.
Okay.
And Battalion Commander General Bill Weiss now, Brigadier General Bill Weiss, who I got the Navy Cross at the fight, called me up and said, Jim, I want you to cross the same rice paddy that Alpha Company 1-3 attempted to go across. And I want you to take Dai Do and relieve the pressure off of Golf Company. So, yes, sir, we're ready to go. And at 5:00 the next morning, after I briefed my troops, platoon leaders were briefed, squad leaders briefed, fire team leaders briefed, all the Marines knew what the hell they were going to do. At 5:00 that morning, we were going to cross what is called the forward edge of the battle area and engage and go across about 700 meters of rice paddy.
Okay, hold on a second, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt you. When he says that to you, is there any part of you that's thinking that's a suicide mission?
I'll tell you what, when you're involved in this business like I was, the only thing I was concerned about is doing the job.
Sure, I understand that. But, I mean, listen, there are certain times in my combat experience where the boss says to me, hey, Mark, this is where I need you to do. And I know I'm walking right into the lion's den. I mean, it's not that I'm asking you if you would have said, no, I'm not going to do it. But I'm just thinking internally, are you thinking this isn't going to end well for us?
Well, Echo Company had never lost a fight. And I wasn't going to lose that damn fight. And the boss told me to do something. He knew Echo Company could do it. I had confidence in them, and we were ready to go. This was our day to play in the NFL. We've been playing college ball,
sure,
high school ball up to that point. This was the NFL, and we were playing in the Super Bowl that day. So Echo Company was ready to play in the Super Bowl that day. We were well trained, and I tell you, we were tough as hell, fit. I kept them physically fit. And at 5:00 that morning, I said, Echo Company, fix bayonets. And in that morning air at 5:00 in the morning in Vietnam and all that sort of smoke from artillery and all, that's a pretty interesting sound to hear 180 bayonets clicking. And if you don't think that'll sock you up, nothing in God's world will sock you up.
That's an awesome description. Just so everybody listening can understand, you're saying 700 yards of rice paddy, which is generally flat field, marshy, and no cover whatsoever, correct?
It was not even marshy. If the paddies had been drained, we were going up against Dai Do with our chest, to speak of it. We had a few berms and a couple of graves, but other than that, it was range fire maneuver, cover one another as you fired maneuver, if you understand that process. And we had to get in that village to relieve golf company, which we did, by the way. It took us about an hour. Looked like it was going to get bogged down at one time, my first two platoons, and I had a platoon in reserve with a headquarters sort of in the middle. It looked like the first two platoons were not going to make it, so I took the reserve platoon. And we did the old classic action when you're fighting in a build-up area. We conducted a penetration into Dai Do, and then we started to spread to the right and to the left. And it turned out we probably killed 300 or 400 North Vietnamese, and we knocked out 100 bunkers.
Okay,
and it was one of the most toughest fights you'll ever believe.
All right, I want to back up a little bit just so everybody gets the scope of this whole thing. As you enter that rice paddy and as you start going forward, tell me about the level of fire that you're receiving, what direction it's coming from, and what you're kind of doing to not only keep yourself but your men alive.
Well, we were taking artillery.
Okay.
We were taking a lot of machine gun fire, RPGs, AK-47 directly at us. And across Jones's Creek, there was an enclave or an area up there we thought the South Vietnamese had secured. It was full of North Vietnamese, and they were sort of probably, if you're looking straight ahead, being at 12 o'clock, probably at our, I would say probably at our 10 o'clock, we were taking fire at our 10 o'clock, from our 10 o'clock, also hitting Echo Company.
Okay. How close is the artillery landing? Are they very danger close?
It was primarily landed in the edge of the village, primarily on golf company. They haven't decided who we were yet. I don't think the observers could see us that much because that early in the morning. But they was taking some around golf company and in the edges of Dai Do. We took some stray rounds coming, but nothing that really killed any Marines. It wounded a couple, but nothing really killed any Marines. But we were taking some mortars now from Dai Do.
All right, so as this starts to unfold, and you talk about you have one platoon go left, another platoon go right, another one go up the middle, correct? And I mean, yeah. Is this just your basic bounding movements? Guys are shooting and covering, shooting and covering?
They fire maneuver where they run 10 or 15 yards, weaving, if you will. They drop down, they start shooting, and the next guy do the same thing over and over, and we'd fire maneuver until we got probably about, I would say probably about 30 or 40 yards from Dai Do, and that's when we went in, and that's where most of the Marines at Echo Company got killed because the apertures, the way these bunkers were designed, they were A-frame, and as you rolled a tank up on them, they just got stronger, but all they had is a very small aperture. So the North Vietnamese only had a very small window that they could fire from, so you had to get very close to that bunker for them to be able to take you on the fire. And that was about 20 or 30 yards. And that's where we really started to take a lot of hits to get in those bunkers.
Well, you're danger close to them and they're danger close to you, right? I mean,
and that's where the major fight took place, and that's where the penetration took place.
All right. So 100 different bunkers.
Yep.
I mean, at least 2 men a bunker, right?
At least a couple of guys in the bunker.
So you're figuring at this point, you're outnumbered probably 2.5 to 1, I would say, right?
I don't know what the number was, but there were more of them than there were in Echo Company.
All right. When you start this task of trying to take out these bunkers and you see guys are going down and there's a lot of them going down, are you rethinking that decision at all?
Well, I think the idea is you don't stop, because what happens if you stop, you get defeated. And you have to worry about those young Marines who were hit or wounded and down after you take this complex. That's the way you help them. You fix it and you take it where then you can take care of medevac. So my whole goal was to take that part of the village, relieve the pressure off of golf company where they could get in the fight more, and then we'd take care of the young Marines and sailors who'd been wounded.
How long does it take you to clear the 100 bunkers?
Well, Well, by the time we left that morning at 5 o'clock, I would say before we finally secured that area, probably about 7 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Would be my best sort of guess after this many years, about 7 o'clock in the morning. And the whole place was a haze, because of all the gunfire and all the naval guns, all the artillery from Dong Ha. Dong Ha was also a big artillery location. So they were pouring artillery in. We were shooting the Newport News. We were shooting destroyers. We had fixed wing coming in. We had Army helicopters. And there was enough bad guys to go around for everyone who wanted to shoot.
At what point do you get wounded?
I took some, when we first going into this first phase of the operation, to take the village of Dai Do, where all the bunkers were in lockout and with a golf company. I took some shrapnel and I took a nick with an AK right across the forehead. And they almost got me there, but fortunately it just left a crease across my forehead. And I took a lot of shrapnel primarily from grenades, and I still I light up every time I go into the airport still. But it was the first phase, and I hadn't been wounded with a weapon other than that kind of wound at that point. The second phase we can describe is where I got shot.
Okay, before we get to the second phase, I'm just curious, when do you actually link up with Gulf Company?
As soon as we got in, they started providing some support and fires. As soon as we took the bunkers, we locked in with them, sort of tied in.
Gotcha.
Reposition his Marines, reposition mine, and we do what all Marines and good infantrymen do. You redistribute your ammo, make sure everyone's got some bullets, and you make sure you dug in before you do anything else in case you get a counterattack. You got to get ready for a major counterattack.
Is there any lull in the battle? Like after you take out the bunkers, is there just a moment where it starts to get quiet, or is it nonstop?
Well, you can see the North Vietnamese started running and running away from the fight. And we shot some of them as they were running away. We had a lull there. My guess is probably a couple hours. Okay. And then the battalion commander was given the order by the regimental commander to continue the attack. And that's when hotel came into play.
How much chance in that lull do you have to start taking stock in how many people are wounded and killed? Or you don't yet?
Well, we got most of the wounded and killed out.
Okay.
Primarily using vehicles and put them out on what is called skimmer boats. We took them back to the Quapiet River. Then they put them on skimmer boats and took them, because helicopters really couldn't get in because the law still all the threat. And we took them up the river to Quapiet to the evacuation point where they had triage and they had all that kind of support. But we had a lot of dead Marines. I had probably, my guess at that point, probably 10. But I had 180 going into that fight. And just tell you the situation, I had only 35 that were still affected. The rest of them were either dead or wounded and had to be medevac.
So you went from 180 to 35?
That's correct.
Damn. All right, so you've linked up with Gulf Company.
Yeah.
You guys have reconsolidated now. You get the lull in the battle. You get the orders to continue forward. What happens next?
Okay, the hotel come around our left flank to continue the attack up through the village of Dai Do, and then Dento, I think, was the next little village they called it. And they got about 300 yards from us, and they got in a whirl of shit. And
could you see it?
I could hear it. I could see it. Yeah, and I could listen to the radio. I was on the battalion attack net, and the company commander, who was a young lieutenant, a good young fellow named Scotty Prescott, who got hit, and later they was taken over by a guy named Vic Taylor. They were doing as best they can, and they got in a whirl of crap up there. And I said, I looked at the guys in the Echo Company, and they were pretty well beat down, as you might well assume. And I said, well, guys, our Marines, I'm going. You guys, if you don't want to go, that's up to you. So I said, I'm going up and help the hotel company before they get their butt wiped out. And all the Marines decided to go, and like Marines would, they want to take care of their fellow Marines. So the 35 Marines and Jim Livingston went charging up, and we joined hands with a hotel, went right in with them. And it was a mixture of hotel and Echo taking on a major counterattack. And we were going from hedgerow to hedgerow and becoming very successful in taking that village. And then another major counterattack took place, and that's when they wounded me. I got shot. And then that sort of just created an environment with me being wounded, I was a senior man, and it sort of began to come apart a little bit. But, I went back to Vietnam about 4 years ago, and I walked that same ground, and the trouble they were fighting so hard, we were fixing to push them out in the open. They had about 300 meters of dirt that they could occupy with all those North Vietnamese troops. And we were pushing them out in the open, and they would have been absolutely slaughtered by gunships, naval guns. So they were fighting for their lives, and we were coming after them.
All right. So you get wounded. Where do you get shot?
I get shot in the leg, and a pretty heavy shot. One of the anti-aircraft 12-7s got me. The little bastard turned it on me and shot me. And my radio operator shot him, and I went down. That kind of slug will take you down pretty good, as you might well imagine. And I just told him, I said, guys, Marines, sailors, you get your ass out of here, pull back. I'll stay here and protect you. And a couple of young black Marines said, Skipper, we're not going to leave you. So they drug my butt back too. And we pulled all the Marines back that were living to inside of Dai Do, where we commenced the initial phase of that operation. And I was medevac by a skimmer, sent back to the evac point, and then went aboard I think it was the Iwo Jima, and I had my first operation out of many, because I left the Iwo Jima, was flown back to Tripoli in Hawaii, and I stayed there for a couple of months after about 6 or 7 operations, and they finally got me wired back together somewhat. And I thought they were going to discharge me because of the wound. And I had a good friend, John Reynolds, who later became a Marine general, kept hiding my health record and wouldn't let the discharge authority get a hold of my health record. And I finally got well enough to stay in the Marine Corps.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, so you guys got stopped at Din 2. You had taken Dai Do. The next town over was Din 2. That's where you met this massive counterattack. Yeah. What happened of the counterattack? Did they also they didn't try to keep pushing forward into Dai Do?
Well, we stopped them, stopped that first wave, and they were probably fixing to come at us again. But like I say, we stopped the first wave, and the other thing was happening, we were running out of ammunition. They were just some dead guys. And, some of the play was not with the ammunition. Some of the play was hand to hand. I mean, we got in there with these guys. These young Marines, they were taking these guys on, and anything that they could grab, they were taking them on with. So it was some of that old classic combat you hear about in the war movies, but you never think you'll be a witness to it. But you want to think about the war movies, and they've been filming here. They'd had some good shots.
I hesitate to ask this question because I almost know the answer, but I'm just curious. You were told to push forward.
Yeah.
You guys get stalled at Din 2. The next town over, Thuong Do, was where the enemy was. They don't push forward. You don't push forward. Is it a stalemate, or is it a victory? I mean, I know it's a victory in a sense that you still held the bridge and you held the town, but how do you kind of characterize it?
Well, I characterize it at that point primarily as I won't say a stalemate, but it was to some degree. But they were very seriously wounded, and we didn't know how serious. And as you are familiar with the episodes in the operation, 2-4 with the remnants of my company, golf company, hotel company, and hotel company commander was also medevac. So the only real company commander left was Jay Vargas, who was the other Medal of Honor recipient from this fight. And they continued to fight, and the battalion commander got shot, so he was medevac. He got shot through the stomach. Later got a Navy Cross. The sergeant major was killed by an NVA. So they were still close in, and they went to the night, I believe, and I think I'm correct, to the night about the 3rd, and they woke up the next morning after the battalion commander had been replaced by the operations officer. Sergeant major's body had been medevac, and they were sort of dug in. And they woke up, I believe, the morning of the 4th, and the North Vietnamese were gone.
Yeah.
But Nhi Ha, up to the area where I initially moved from to the river, they had moved in an Army battalion. Who I know the battalion commander's name is Leach, who was a wonderful guy, who's a retired brigadier general in the Army. And they had been in major contracts. Task Force Robbie, if you go back and look at Task Force Robbie, they almost got wiped out. I think that was 1-9 1st Battalion 9th Marines with a lot of tanks. They almost got wiped out. So there was a major push, and there's been a little controversy about, well, what were the NVA up to? there's some controversy. They were just trying to close the Quaviet River. And I say BS. That many troops coming down at one time, they weren't trying to close Quaviet River. They were trying to destroy Dong Ha Combat Base, take out Marine Division headquarters, and create a major defeat.
A decisive victory for them, yeah.
Decisive victory at that location, and people would have said, we already had a controversy going on because of Hue and Saigon and all those other locations. And that would and the NBA knew this. If they could win that fight, I think they figured we'd haul tail and leave at that point, 68.
I mean, it sounds plausible, right? I mean, if anybody knows anything about the Vietnam War, the idea that they could have actually overtaken an entire American base certainly would have been at a minimum, a huge moral victory for the North Vietnamese and the communists, let alone, as you said, a strategic victory that could have changed the landscape of the entire war in and of itself. I've read several accounts on this, sir. You guys lost 81 Marines. You had about 250 wounded, correct?
I think it was 87.
Okay.
I think it's 87 killed, 267. Again, that's a rough number. Medevac, and there were probably 160 wounded that were not medevac. So basically, the whole battalion was either killed or wounded.
Okay. To that end, on the other side of the North Vietnamese deaths, I've seen numbers vary up to 2,400, from about 600 to 800. And that's just, and the only reason I bring that up is to give the audience a scope of what you guys were up against.
Well, what I was told, and this I came, the battalion commander told me this. This is not my story. This is his. He got an email from an engineer in the 3rd Marine Division. They sent him with bulldozers, and they dug a trench, and they put 1,200 bodies in it. And that's part of the story. And like I say, there was dead North Vietnamese all over the area. And I'm guessing if they had to pull out a whole NBA division, they were banged up, and they probably had, my guess, describing the theater I did before and the number of contacts concurrently going on, they must have had 10 or 12,000 people in that area. I mean,
that's what it looks like as far as when you look at scopes of the battle and what was there. I mean, it's the numbers are astounding of what you were up against, and I think that just speaks to.
If you go back and study your map and look where Task Force Robbie was, look at GLN, look at the South Vietnamese who had pulled out, I guess. I never figured that out, but the battalion commander said they had pulled out. And you look at the Battle of Dai Do with the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, and you look at the Army unit up at Neha, across that whole broad spectrum of dirt just south of the Ben Hai River and between north of Quaviet, that was a lot of ground and a lot of contacts, and all of them were major.
So the battle ends on May 3rd, May 4th, 1968. You have to fast forward 2 years and 2 weeks before you're standing in front of President Richard Nixon at the time to receive the Medal of Honor. Tell us how that all came to pass. When did you find out? And, what that whole process was like.
Well, it was very interesting. And believe it or not, I was with the Army. I was sent down to Fort Benning, Georgia after finishing school. And it was a great tour with the Army. I was sent down to be with our Ranger, Airborne, Scout Dogs, Pathfinders, and also teaching the Army Infantry School to Army captains and other service who attended that school. And I think his name was Talbot, who was a wonderful guy, good leader, Major General of the Army, called me up with my boss, who was a Marine Colonel, and we went up to his headquarters on I think it was the 3rd or 4th floor. We were on the 2nd floor. And he called me in. There was also an Army captain named Ron Ray, and he called us up to the office and said, both of you guys are due to go to Washington to receive your medals of honor. And I'd been hearing some rumbling that, they were working on one. But, you were never sure. And then he said, this is for real. This is the day. Get together with the travel people, arrange your travel and your family's travel, to include my mom and dad, my brother and his wife, to go to Washington and be involved in that ceremony with, I think, about 8 or 9 other people during that particular event. So there's 8 or 9 of us that got that award, to include Ron Ray, myself, and some other guys who you can research and find out. But it was a pretty sizable ceremony. And my young daughter there was about 2 years old, who later graduated from the Naval Academy and now is a big doctor. And Nixon came up and trying to sort of talk to her. And she just sort of pushed him off. She wouldn't have anything to do with the press. But when the cameras started rolling, boy, she became the greatest friend of President Nixon's you'll ever believe.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's a really vivid memory all the family has.
Can you describe the emotions of what that's like when that medal is going around your neck?
Well, I've thought about it a little bit, but not much. But I tell you, what you do is you put it around your neck, and I'm sure this is the case for every recipient. As much as you can remember, that battle sort of goes across your memory bank, and you always think about those young Marines that got wounded, didn't make it home, and never had a chance to be fathers and grandfathers, and their name is on the wall today. And, you're thinking about it, and that's sort of embedded in that memory bank. And, you're just thinking, wouldn't it be great if I was not even here getting this and those young Marines were alive? That's what I always reflect on. But I always wear it for them, and their names are on the wall, and I think about it. And I'll tell you, the Medal of Honor didn't define my life. It certainly added to my life experiences, but it didn't define my life. I would always be a good Marine, and I always want to be respected as a Marine all during my career. But I think it's a medal that you hang around your neck and you wear it honorably for those young Marines and sailors who didn't come home.
Sir, when you think about the battle, even all these years later, is there anything that you would have done differently in retrospect, knowing what you know now?
No.
Not even a decision to direct fire here, or that, and that's kind of what I mean. When you,
I tell you what I was privy to, what I witnessed, circumstances I had to fight the battle on, there was nothing that changed my mind. And like I say, I always remember two things that I wanted to do as a Marine, and that's the reason the Marines who served with me will tell you I was tough as hell. And that means making them train, making them shoot, making them stay physically fit, making them take care of themselves. I had two things to do in that job. I wanted to do the job when I was assigned a job, and I wanted to bring as many Marines home as I could. And that was embedded in my memory bank, and I was going to do everything I could in terms of getting those young Marines and sailors ready to accomplish that. That was my job. That's the reason I was sent there by this country. Kill the bad guys and bring the young Marines home.
So when you think about that battle and its place in history, are you ever sort of, is in awe the right word, of what were able to accomplish?
I tell you, the thing that frustrates me more about that battle, it's not a well-known fight, and the average historian don't appreciate the significance of the strategic significance of that battle. That's what bothers me. Even the Marine Corps. If you think about the Marine Corps, they always talk about Quezon, they always talk about Starlight, Da Nang, they always talking about, the Battle of Hawaii City. That's what you hear in the historical references of the Marine Corps. You never really hear about this battle, and the strategic significance. Because we're really trying to sort of bring that to the sense of Marines in general, how important this was, what the sacrifice was, and what the outcome was.
So there are just a few people still living who get to wear the Medal of Honor. Now, there's more of them coming from, the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, but it's a pretty elite group. When you're around other Medal of Honor recipients, whether it's from Vietnam or even current ones today, what's that like? I mean, because, knowing that you got something that isn't common at all, it's got to be interesting to talk to other people who have been bestowed the same honor.
Well, the strange thing about it, people would think we're all just a big bunch of the same looking guy, the same size, the same fit, and all in the same square. Totally different. You got from privates to lieutenant generals. Some of them had totally different experience. Some of them special forces. Some of them was like me in the Marine infantry. Some of them were in the Navy as SEALs. The experiences are different, and they really are the face of America. And, out of 3,500 plus that have received it, if you go back and search in history, there is no defining person that you can look at and say, this is the average Medal of Honor guy. I have never witnessed a guy of that sort since I've been involved. And there's only 71 of us left, by the way, as of yesterday, the 30th. That brought us back to 71 out of 3,500. And by the way, from a historical reference, I live in the town where the medal really sort of, in a sense, originated from. It's originated from the Civil War. The first round of the Civil War were fired here in Charleston. And also the first black recipient of the Civil War was based on an action here in the movie. If you go back and study the movie Glory, that was the first action that a black recipient came into being, as far as the Medal of Honor recipient.
Now, you're on the foundation of something called the Medal of Honor Recipient Foundation, correct?
I'm on the Medal of Honor Heritage Foundation. And unfortunately, there's a little bit of confusion out there because there's another outfit out in Texas trying to do the same thing. But we are the legit location of the National Congressional Medal of Honor Museum. There was an act passed in '99, designated 3 national points of interest associated with the Medal of Honor. And we were that museum here at Patriots Point. And just for FYI, I don't object to any other museum built around the country to introduce and have the people of experiencing the history of the Medal of Honor and the actions of those recipients. I'm not against that at all. I'm supportive of it because I want just as many young Americans and old Americans to be familiar with that experience. But there's only one National Congressional Medal of Honor Museum at Patriots Point, Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. And the organization is called the National Medal of Honor Heritage Foundation. And if you go on the internet, you can see that, make a donation if you desire. And I hope people will make a donation. But look, the key word is heritage. And that defines us from the other outfits, okay?
Sir, as far as where things are now with the military, obviously the Marine Corps has changed. Obviously, the military has changed. When you see it now, I don't know. I don't ask if it's better, but what stands out to you as a major difference between when you served and what goes on today?
Well, I tell you, the thing I reminded of, is Marines are always going to be Marines. They go through the same cut. I think the young Americans coming up now that are going into the military are just very inspiring people. They're very smart. Physically fit, they're very capable of doing their job in a very difficult environment. Everything they do is reported in the press, contrary to my experiences.
Right, yeah.
The thing that saddens me is only about 25% of young Americans can serve because of their physical fitness, their moral fitness, they're not qualified mentally to do it. And that's a real concern for every military guy. I mean, the current nature of our young population in terms of the overall population, we are letting these young people down, and I blame the adults. I don't blame them. Education-wise and expectation, everyone can't get a trophy, and that's the problem with a couple of generations. Everyone's got to have a trophy. There's no winners or losers. Let me tell you, on the field of battle, there's winners and losers.
No, I mean, again, sir, I think it's well said, to the point where, the leadership in our organization today sometimes adjusts, I think, and overcorrects a little too far to what society is saying, so to speak, if that makes any sense.
They always overcompensate with rules of engagement and all that. I hear they've been over there 5 or 6 times, and they always say to shoot at the bad guy, you got to go through some damn lawyer. And, that's frustrating to me. When you send young people over there, you have to understand they are being subjected to something only probably 0.5% or less of Americans people have ever experienced. So everyone's trying to second guess their actions. I see some court martials going on. People don't understand the emotion of getting involved with killing people and watching your buddies die. That emotion is hard to handle, and I'm very sympathetic to some of these young people when they talk to me about some of these circumstances, and I see some of these young men being court-martialed. That's really bothersome to me. If you have been there, you can't understand the emotions of that moment.
Well, we talk about that all the time on the podcast. You have to be careful about the context of battle and what it is. You can't apply civilian, everyday life American values to combat because the two, in and of themselves, are naturally opposed. You know, there's not a way you can try to find a nice way to handle battle. It's ugly.
As I'll say, it's not a law enforcement mission. It's a mission. You've got one job and one responsibility when you join the military and when we stand with the military, to go out and kill the bad guys. That's the only job we've got. And we never need to lose perspective of that. But again, it's not a law enforcement mission. It's a mission to go out and destroy the enemy that's a threat to this country.
Just some final thoughts and final questions here, sir. When you got home from Vietnam, what was your reaction from people? Because obviously the stories are out there of how poorly Vietnam vets were treated.
Well, I went back and I was behind the wire, so to speak. I was aboard a military base. I never experienced any of these talks about people spitting on you and all that kind of stuff. I never experienced that. And, I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and, I hope they're being truthful about it and they're just trying to ingratiate something they've heard about and try to put themselves in that same environment. I'm not calling anyone a fibber about it, but I never experienced that. And the other thing really bothers me, a lot of people, and this is Jim Livingston. I'm not talking down anyone. All this notion of you go to speeches and it's always welcome home. And I always talked about welcome home to Vietnam vets. I'm through with that. I've been home. You don't have to tell me welcome home. And I sort of wish we'd knock that crap off.
That's an interesting perspective. Well, I mean, elaborate a little more. I'm curious because welcome home is something that, a lot of people genuinely feel is a good sentiment, no?
Well, it used to be a good sentiment, but now it seems to be tied totally to the Vietnam experience. People come up and hug you and welcome home. And, you don't really hear that from the World War II guys or the Korean guys or the young war terrorists.
Oh, okay, I see.
It's totally associated with the Vietnam experience because we didn't get our big parade. We didn't get this or we didn't get that. I went over there to do my job the country sent me to do. I did it to the best of my ability, to do my mission to bring young Marines home. And, this nothing of running around, and that's war ended in 1975. And by the way, I was the operations officer for the evacuation of Saigon, just as FYI. I'm beyond that now. I don't need to be told that anymore.
All right. So when you see the way veterans are received today and the warm welcome that they get and the high regard that they are held in, does that bother you at all?
You know what's unique about that? And I always tell people, the veterans today wouldn't get that kind of a treatment had been for Vietnam veterans and how they were treated and how they made a commitment to make sure no other veterans were ever treated, as long as they were alive, treated the way they were treated.
I mean, I agree. I think there is a lot of guilt, American guilt over the way Vietnam vets were treated. And as such, guys like me who fought in this engagement, in this war, are viewed much differently.
Well, the thing about it, too, I'm continually running into people. I give a lot of talks and travel around the country. And people my age are coming up continually saying, well, giving me the reason they couldn't go to Vietnam. And I just look at them and I just say, okay, very well, and I walk off. They're dealing with their conscience. I don't have to deal with mine.
No, and that's kind of, I mean, you said it earlier when I was asking about the college deferment and everything else. You were pretty clear on the fact that this was your choice and it didn't really matter what anybody else had chosen to do at that point.
Exactly. I made my choice and they made theirs. If they didn't go, they made their choice. And that's in older age, I'm soon to be 80 years old. If their conscience is bothering them, they made their own decision and they're going to have to live with it.
Well, sir, again, an amazing nearly 34-year career, one of the most pivotal, one of the most decisive battles in the Vietnam War is on your record. Obviously, the Medal of Honor speaks for itself, but certainly just an amazing story and an incredible career. And I thank you so much for sharing it with our audience.
Well, I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best and simplify to everyone that's listening, okay? And support the Medal of Honor Heritage Foundation. Send us some money.
Major General Retired James Livingston, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Semper Fi. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.